Under the Marcos Jr. administration, tensions in the South China Sea are reaching a boiling point.
Compared to previous years, 2023, to include the first quarter of 2024, is a marked escalation.
Meanwhile, the Philippines draws closer to its oldest ally.
Any attack on Philippine public vessel or Philippine metropolitan territory would be considered an attack on the United States.
What is behind the rise in hostilities?
Perhaps President Marcos might be of the view that China promises a lot, but then maybe delivers not up to what it has promised.
From Beijing's point of view, it's Marcos who's trying to make an issue out of this.
And are China and the Philippines headed towards armed conflict?
We cannot totally take out the possibility of possible conflict, possible accident that could, disturb the status quo in the South China Sea.
March 5th, 2024. The Filipino resupply boat Uniza May 4 was headed to the second Thomas Shoal. It is a submerged reef in a disputed part of the South China Sea, part of which is called the West Philippine Sea by the Filipinos. En route, it found itself blockaded by Chinese coast guards and maritime militia. After a 2-hour standoff, the wooden vessel was barraged by water cannons from the Chinese crafts.
Medyo nag-vibrate yung saka sumabog yung from video, kita mo sumabog yung glass. Opo. Talagang malakas ang ingay. So, yun lang nga, buti lang hindi nila tinuloy, nag-pull back na.
2 weeks later, on another resupply mission, Uniza May 4 was again blasted by water cannons.
Well, for the March 5 incident, there's something that the Chinese Coast Guard has been usually doing, making use of their water cannon to prevent the supply boats for reaching the BRP Sierra Madre and completing the resupply mission. But the March 23 incident is completely different with the previous water cannon incident, because this time they never hesitated to use jet stream water cannon, and they never also hesitated to use that kind of level of aggression to destroy or damage and endanger the seaworthiness of the supply boat.
In both cases, the Uniza May 4 was forced to turn back, marking the first time a resupply vessel failed to reach the BRP Sierra Madre. The BRP Sierra Madre was a ship that the Philippines deliberately grounded on the shoal in 1999 to mark its territorial claim to the reef. A rotating handful of Filipino troops have been stationed at the maroon wreck since.
It is an outpost of the Philippine Navy. It is a commissioned vessel. If we cave in our stand with BRP Sierra Madre, it would be easier for China to force away on the other features that we have in the West Philippine Sea.
Second Thomas Shoal, which the Philippines calls Ayungin Shoal, is part of the Spratly Island chain. Is located 200 kilometers west of Palawan, within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, a country's EEZ extends 200 nautical miles beyond its coast. Beijing claims over 90% of the South China Sea, demarcated by the 9-dash line, based on a 1951 map which cuts into the Philippines' EEZ. After China seized control of Scarborough Shoal, another disputed atoll, in 2012, Second Thomas Shoal has been the center of contention between China and the Philippines. To the Chinese, the Filipinos were the ones who violated UNCLOS with the grounding of the Sierra Madre.
Ramming an old World War II battleship onto a disputed area, that goes against everything in international law. Originally they said that it was an accident and the boat just grounded there and they're going to remove it. Now that has changed to we want to repair it and take care of it. They've been sending building materials to the boat because it's an extremely old boat and I'm sure the living conditions on it aren't terrific.
They believe that each time Oneida May 4 goes to Ayungin Shoal, that boat is carrying construction materials. But I would say it would take more than Oneida May 4 to bring in construction materials. We rotate the troops, we provide them supplies, we are responsible for the upkeep, the maintenance, the safety, and the comfort of BRP Sierra Madre, not the construction.
Since August last year, the saber rattling has become cacophonous. The Philippines Coast Guard recorded at least 7 incidences of water cannoning and collisions with the Chinese. By contrast, before the latest round of tensions, the last major incident involving physical contact was in November 2021. The Chinese blamed the Philippines for the brinkmanship at sea.
我们再次奉劝菲方正视事实，信守承诺，立即停止侵权挑衅，尽快回到通过谈判协商妥处涉海分歧的正轨。如果菲方一意孤行，中方将采取必要措施，坚定捍卫自身正当权益。
They believe that if we're going to be successful in reinforcing the structure of BRP Sierra Madre, and it will already be almost impossible for them to remove us in Ayungin Shoal, thereby if it would force them to remove BRP Sierra Madre, it would also trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty, since this is a commissioned naval vessel.
Under the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty between the U.S. and Philippines, the two countries are obliged to assist each other in the face of an attack.
Mutual Defense Treaty applies to armed attacks on our armed forces, Coast Guard vessels, public vessels, or aircraft in the Pacific, including anywhere in the South China Sea. So make no mistake, Mr. President, we will always have your back in the South China Sea or elsewhere in the region.
How did tensions escalate so quickly between China and the Philippines? Especially since the previous president, Rodrigo Duterte, had tried to find rapprochement with China. Then, newly in power, he downplayed a 2016 ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which ruled China's 9-line claim over the disputed waters invalid. Duterte also suspended joint military exercises with the U.S.
That was the legitimacy claim of the Duterte administration, that we cannot simply provoke and anger China because it's a neighbor, it's a superpower, and it can really sabotage Philippine economy. China is key to Philippine development, to Philippine economic growth.
His successor, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., however, would take a different tact.
The tension has been building up, especially after we have a dramatic change in Philippine policy towards China under President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos, who basically effected a major transition of Philippine policy from during the time of President Duterte, characterized basically by appeasing China, to a current policy, of course, of confronting or balancing China's expansive claim in the South China Sea.
Marcos' own personal calculation and that of his government is that at the moment, China is the one challenge strategically in Philippine national security. But to say that Marcos has an anti-China policy is completely false. Marcos does not have a very critical or a very negative view of China. It simply wants China to behave in accordance to peace and stability and to somehow respect the arbitral ruling, international maritime law, and to treat and respect the Philippines as a neighbor.
At first, President Marcos appeared to follow his predecessor's strategy to court China. Beijing was one of his first ports of call as president. Yet, soon after his visit, news of altercations in the South China Sea received wide attention in the media, in what has been called a transparency strategy.
The main objective of the transparency strategy is to educate the Filipino people for them to be aware of what's really happening in the West Philippine Sea. You have to understand that President Bongbong Marcos has inherited a country that were made to believe that the Chinese government is a friendly nation, that there is no aggression, that things are already at peace in the West Philippine Sea. So for him to be able to once again get the support of the Filipino people, he has to give something to the public for them to at least give a bird's eye view of what's really happening. And this was the first objective. The second objective of the transparency strategy is to rally support for the international community.
From Beijing's point of view, it's Marcos who's trying to make an issue out of this. I mean, it cannot be a coincidence that there are so many media from all over the world on the boat when they were trying to, push these building materials in. And the Chinese responded by using water cannon. That's obviously a PR play. Part of this domestic politics, it does good for leaders to look like they're being strong.
As tensions simmer, the Philippines has committed to maintain the BRP Sierra Madre and respond to what it calls Chinese aggression. Each resupply mission carries more dangers and risks.
Definitely all of our Coast Guard personnel are aware of the risks that they are doing. But if you're going to ask me the level of morale of the sailors of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard, I think we still have this high level of commitment to maintain our presence in the West Philippine Sea.
And in these troubled waters, one island is caught in the crosshairs. For a few weeks this year, a small group of islands sitting at the intersection of the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean was abuzz with a flurry of activity.
Parang araw-araw may mga dumadating na helicopter, mga malalaking C-130, mga ganun po. Then, marami na rin po mga sunda, halo-halo na po. May mga Pinoy, may mga kano. Para sa akin po parang nakakapanibago sa akin kasi hindi naman talaga normal na may mga sundalong dumadating dito. Iniisip po na baka may war na.
This is the town of Basco, the capital of Batanes, a small group of islands in the northernmost reaches of the Philippines. This archipelago is just 1/3 the size of Metro Manila, with a population of 18,000. And this year, it was chosen as one of the sites for a joint military exercise between the U.S. and the Philippines. The annual joint military exercise is also known as Balikatan, a Filipino term for shoulder to shoulder. This year's drills involved 16,700 troops from the U.S., Philippines, Australia, and for the first time, France.
I think the biggest change is that the Balikatan exercises has now included more like-minded states than before. So of course, it started with just the U.S. and the Philippines, that then expanded to the other U.S. allies of the United States. As far as the Philippines is concerned, this is simply to better enhance the ability of the Philippine military to perform its constitutional duty of external defense.
Since Balikatan launched in 1991, this year's exercise was the largest in scope. And even though it is the 4th time Batanes hosted the exercise, the scale of this year's operation surprised some locals.
Nung nakaraan taon, hindi po kami kinukuha kasi usually po isang araw or 2 araw lang po sila dito. Ngayon po mas matagal, kaya kailangan po nila nung tagalaba talaga ng damit nila.
May pumunta dito na nung balikatan ngayon, tapos nagtanong yung kung pwede akong ng grocery sa kanila, pero hindi kaya. Kasi sabi nila mga 1,000 daw yung parating. Kasi nung nakarang taon, konti lang naman. Tsaka saglit lang.
The choice of Batanes is strategic. The island chain is only 140 kilometers away from Taiwan. Batanes sits next to the Bashi Channel, which connects the Western Pacific to the South China Sea. It is a strategic passage for China to cross to the east of Taiwan in the event of an invasion, making Batanes a possible landing point. This year, one of the islands of Batanes was used to simulate an island recapture. China had previously warned the Philippines about wading into the Taiwan issue.
一个中国原则是红线，也是底线。任何人在台湾问题上挑衅，中方都绝不接受，必将坚决回击。我们敦促菲方切实遵守中菲建交公报精神，恪守一个中国原则，停止在涉台问题上的错误言行。
U.S. Philippine ties had been icy during the Duterte administration. But relations began to thaw in the final year of his term. The relationship continued to strengthen with his successor. Under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, the U.S. military can operate from 5 bases in the Philippines. Last year, President Marcos Jr. expanded this, signing an agreement to allow access to 4 additional bases. 3 of these line up north, close to Taiwan, while 1 faces west towards the South China Sea. The expansion was viewed unfavorably by Beijing.
The U.S., instead of trying to figure out a way in which this can be resolved amicably, keeps trying to egg on nations, proxies, to take on China on the theory that we can play the underdog card. We'll say, oh, poor Philippines is being bullied by China. Now, this is the same thing that they're trying with Taiwan, that it's always this big nation trying to take on little nations. Well, the irony there is it's the United States who's been the largest bully in the world. China is not the one who's been starting wars. It's not China who's torn up agreements. It's not China who has put unilateral sanctions on other countries, friend and foe alike. It is not China whose policies change every 4 to 8 years depending on who is sitting in the White House.
The claim of China and others is that the Philippines simply gave in to whatever the U.S. demanded. But to simply say that the Philippines merely complied with what the United States is totally false, because the Taiwan contingency as an issue, as a possible regional flashpoint, greatly affects Philippine interests. One, the Philippines is the nearest, in terms of geography, the nearest country to Taiwan in Southeast Asia. And second, there are more than 220,000 Filipinos living and working in Taiwan. And to have the ability to repatriate them in the worst case scenario is to also ensure that the logistics of it will be readily available, because if not, then you're talking about the failure of the Philippine government under Marcos to implement a core pillar of Philippine foreign policy, which is the protection of its citizens overseas.
Pag yung mga kababayan natin mga Pilipino sa Taiwan at maipit sila doon, pwede silang kunin doon via Batanes route.
So, what do the Filipinos think about all this increased military activity? According to a survey by Okta Research, about 54% of Filipinos favor the expansion of U.S. Philippine military ties. 11% are opposed, while 32% are undecided. Caught in the line of fire, the residents on Batanes have similar mixed feelings about being drawn into superpower rivalries.
We are very much happy to welcome them and to conduct such balikatan here in Batanes or other related military activities that will enhance or that will protect and secure our little province and at the same time our country.
Parang hindi ko gusto. Kasi parang yung pagka ng Batanes, yung simpleng buhay, parang magiging parang magkakaroon ng konting gulo, parang ganun. May effect, di ba? Mawawala rin yung peacefulness, ganun. Siyempre matatakot ka din.
Yung sa pagiging probinsya, na tahimik, ganun po. Tapos darating yung mga nagbabalikatan exercise. Para po sa akin, okay lang naman siya kasi para din naman sa atin. Mas maganda yung prepared saka yung trainings and drills. Paano tayo magiging magaling sa isang bagay kung walang trainings, yun po. So pagdating nila dito, okay lang din naman sa business kasi sila, may pumapasok na income naman.
Straightforward ako magsalita, hindi ako pabor. Dahil siyempre, unang-una, yung mga kababayan natin, siyempre, maging apektado. Affected sila sa kanilang pamumuhay. Pero, sagot ko naman, since this is a national security concern, wala kami magawa.
Whatever their feelings, the residents on Batanes have their own contingency plans. 34-year-old reservist Joma Del Carbansay was one of the 119 volunteers to join the Philippine Navy's reservist forces in March. His recruitment comes out of the Philippines Department of National Defense called for more military presence in Batanes early this year.
At first po is na syempre naman may kaba po yan because we are not totally military personnel. We are volunteer reserve, but as a citizen of this province, we are aware that the need of the support of our men in uniform personnel here in Batanes. We join here the reservists to be their katuwang sa if ever there will be attention or invasion dito sa ating probinsya.
Yet, any military escalation could come at a cost to Manila. For now, China remains the Philippines' largest trading partner. Is the Philippines looking to reduce its economic dependence on China? It is harvest season here in Kalinga, a landlocked province in northern Luzon. Here, farmers are reaping the benefits of the Chico River irrigation pump, which began operation a year ago. It brings water from the Chico River to agricultural land in Kalinga and Cagayan.
Matagal na po akong farmer, matagal na. Kaso, pangalawang crop pa lang ito na mapapatubigan ng Chico pump. So, ang pananim namin ay yung palay lang, plain rice. Dati, hindi po kami nagkaka-100 na kaban sa isang ektarya. Ngayon po, 180 na ang na-harvest. Medyo mababa na yung 120 ngayon, ma'am, na-harvest sa isang ektarya. Talaga happy ang mga tao ngayon.
The pump irrigates 8,700 hectares of land and ensures ample, stable water supply to over 4,000 farmers in the area.
Pag walang ulan kasi, ang main problem namin, yung mahal ng diesel. Kasi siyempre, gagamit kami ng deep well, mga makina, diesel din ang kailangan ang ginagamit namin, ma'am. Ngayon, at nagagawa namin yung gusto namin, ma'am, talaga ng ganda ng impact ng irrigation sa amin.
This pump is funded by Chinese money. 85% of the $87 million project was loaned from the Export-Import Bank of China as an official development assistance. It falls under former President Rodrigo Duterte's Build, Build, Build program, which launched 1 year into his term.
It's an infrastructure drive by the Duterte administration to enhance and invest more in public works, infrastructure in the Philippines. And during his time, that was synergized with China's Belt and Road Initiative.
One goal of the BBB program was to reduce poverty. Belt and Road Initiative projects were expected to create jobs for 21,000 Filipinos. Progress, however, has been slow. Of the 16 major infrastructure projects funded by China, only 4, including the pump, has been completed.
There are several reasons why some projects have been delayed. Some projects did not undergo proper or adequate feasibility studies. Another is, right-of-way issues. This is very, especially in infrastructure, because it requires a lot of consultations with affected residents or stakeholders. So there's a lot of legal issues when it comes to those things.
Last year, the Philippines withdrew from 3 projects. Negotiations were stalled due to Beijing's long-term policy and high interest rates. Manila is instead looking at funding offers from Japan, South Korea, and India, a sign that the Marcos administration is reducing its economic reliance on China. Additionally, the Filipinos have doubts over Beijing's investment pledges, which had been made to President Duterte.
During the time of President Duterte, the number of registered Chinese firms in the Philippines increased. Investments also did increase. The problem was that the Chinese were not able to live up to the expectation of actualizing all the $24 billion of investments. I think perhaps President Marcos might be of the view that China promises a lot, but then maybe delivers not up to what it has promised.
And what we're seeing right now is that infrastructure projects have not only lagged, but the Philippine government, the Philippine bureaucracy would rather embark on partnerships with its usual countries like Japan, the United States, rather than with China.
And President Marcos's pivot has met with success. For the first time ever, the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines held a trilateral summit this April in Washington.
The formation of this trilateral security partnership provides, of course, dual elements in terms of security: maritime, military security, and more significantly, economic security. So you will also have efforts by both countries to redirect their economies to each other, efforts by the Philippines to export its strategic minerals to Japan and the United States, investment by Japan and the United States to develop the Luzon corridor, and of course, massive infrastructure programs development in the Philippines funded by Tokyo and Washington, not by Beijing. So in a way, we're also showing to our people and to other ASEAN countries, we need not be dependent on one economic power.
The U.S. appears eager to fill the investment gap left by the Chinese. This March, U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo led a trade and investment mission to the Philippines with a delegation of 22 American companies.
On this trip alone, these companies are announcing over $1 billion of U.S. investments, including creating educational opportunities to over 30 million Filipinos.
This is a welcome move for Manila after it ranked 6th in FDI inflows among Southeast Asian countries in a 2023 United Nations World Investment Report. The country's net FDI inflow dropped for the second time last year since 2021, from $12 billion to $9.5 billion in 2022 and $8.8 billion in 2023.
For the Marcos Jr. administration, it's not only important that the U.S. delivers on the security component of the alliance, but more so, equally important, is on the economic side of that alliance. So the unprecedented presidential trade mission of the Biden administration, which has never been undertaken to any other country, tells you that at the moment, the Philippines is also relying on the U.S. for its economic well-being.
One sector expected to benefit? The semiconductor industry, which accounts for 20% of Filipino exports and 12% of its gross domestic product. Raimondo announced plans to double the number of semiconductor assembly, testing, packaging factories in the Philippines. Yet for the moment, China remains as the Philippines' top trading partner. It is the archipelago's second largest export market and biggest import source. Decoupling from China will be impossible.
There's still a lot of products here that the ordinary people get from China. So they still would want to engage with China because of the relatively cheap cost of Chinese products. But should tensions escalate, China might choose to, again, tighten their regulatory standards in this regard.
If Marcos is trying to make an issue with Beijing, it's going to be very hard to have any kind of real economic cooperation. If the relations are defined by this issue about the Philippines trying to make something to, in essence, favor Washington or gain Washington's favor, this is going to make it much more difficult during the short run. It's just hard to understand what the end game is if one of your largest trading partners is in fact someone you wish to classify as an enemy. And who is it benefiting? Is it benefiting the Philippines? I don't think so.
The business community has been alarmed by tensions in the South China Sea. They have called for peaceful negotiations with China, concerned over the loss of trade and investment.
Nobody wins if we go to war. So the key here is to establish communication and mutual respect, and eventually we will come to agreement. I'm sure in spite of our difficulties in the West Philippine Sea, China is still open to help and to discuss the various things we can do together in the Philippines, knowing for a fact that we have many overseas Chinese who are currently located in the Philippines, and there are local Chinese. We are born no longer Chinese, but born Filipinos.
China is also the Southeast Asian nation's third largest source of tourists. But as relations sour, there is a growing sense of paranoia towards Chinese presence in the Philippines. Last month, a group of lawmakers called for an investigation into an influx of 4,600 Chinese nationals in the Cagayan province, citing it as a national security concern. The province is located in northern Luzon, where two bases that house U.S. troops under EDCA lie.
That issue was taken up by only a few politicians. Maybe they have their own agenda behind. Many Chinese came to the Philippines because they want to learn English. We don't want them to be pinpointing particular race and hitting them just because of the color or because of the race or because of the language or whatever it is. We should avoid racism or racist being racist. That is where we are coming from. So we were against that.
Will Sino-Filipino relations continue spiraling downwards? A looming energy crisis may reveal the answer. "50 kilometers northwest of Palawan lies the Philippines' only source of natural gas. The Malampaya gas field powers 20% of the country's energy needs. Its supply, however, has been dwindling since 2019.
Currently, the field production is able to supply about 1,500 megawatts to the gas generating companies. No? eventually, if we don't do nothing by 2027, it will go down to about 800 megawatts. So we have to act now. So we're doubling efforts in the department for exploration in other areas.
And here, the Philippines is looking to the South China Sea. According to the U.S. Energy Information Agency, these waters could hold approximately 3.6 billion barrels of petroleum and 40.3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in proven and probable reserves. The Philippines was set to explore oil and gas resources in the South China Sea with China and Vietnam following a 2005 agreement.
We may lack technical capability to undertake this size of operations. Also, we may lack the financial capabilities to undertake these operations. So, in terms of the Philippine government itself undertaking the exploration, it's quite an expensive exercise, and the risks are very high, because if you do not discover a field, then there is no way of getting back your money.
However, the agreement was ruled to be unconstitutional by the Philippine Supreme Court last year.
The Philippine Constitution says that it has to have full control and supervision of exploiting natural resources. Okay? So that means under Philippine law, China can only be a subcontractor. And of course, the Chinese would not agree to that because they claim sovereignty over the waters in the South China Sea.
Talks with Beijing to strike a new joint exploration deal were initially revived under Marcos Jr. But with the current tensions, these plans appear dead in the water.
President Marcos raised again the issue of joint development to President Xi Jinping in January 2023 during his visit. President Xi Jinping did not answer President Marcos' query about a joint development at the Reed Bank. A few days later, an article came out in the Global Times announcing that China will only agree to a joint development in undisputed territories. So this basically defeats the very purpose of joint development. You will have joint development in disputed territories because you want to set aside the sovereignty claim.
Well, it's simple. China has both the money and the expertise to do this kind of exploration and to extract the oil and gas that is found. Obviously, Philippines wants to get that. But it's very difficult to see it going forward very productively under the current circumstances. And it's not that China is defining the relationship and saying, if you don't do something about this second Thomas Shoals, we won't do this, that, or other thing. It's quite the other way.
Early this year, Manila announced that it will proceed with oil and gas exploration without Beijing. This presents another potential area of friction.
If the Marcos administration decides to go it alone without China in the South China Sea and exploit the resources there, China for sure will come and impede those efforts, as they did in the previous years. And if China will unilaterally drill for oil also, the Philippines also will object to it. So it could be a flashpoint.
President Marcos Jr. had warned that a single mistake or misunderstood move could lead to conflict. And opportunities for miscalculation are plentiful. In mid-May, a Filipino civilian convoy of boats made their way to Scarborough Shoal, supposedly to resupply fishermen stationed there. They were eventually turned back after close encounters with Chinese vessels. Come June, A new Chinese law will allow its coast guards to retain foreigners found trespassing in Chinese-claimed waters. The Philippines says this violates international law. Some in the Philippines are worried the Philippines and China are edging closer to armed conflict. The president's own sister, Senator Amy Marcos, said the Philippines is taking a dangerous path. While a pro-Duterte coalition, called the Citizens Coalition Against the War, are concerned that the proxy war between the superpowers will be fought on Asian soil.
The hostility between the U.S. and China has created an opportunity for Marcos to say, oh, look, I'm being strong, I'm protecting our territory. And it's not going to change anytime soon, especially with the U.S., in essence, trying to egg Marcos on in what seems just, either purely PR or extremely dangerous situation if accidents start to occur.
To simply say that the Marcos Jr. administration is pro-US, then that is a blind interpretation towards the stronger security relationship, for example, between the Philippines and Australia, which had recently become strategic partners, the ongoing progress towards a reciprocal access agreement with Japan, and increasing strategic cooperation with other countries that includes EU countries, the UK, South Korea, and India. So all of this simply tells us that for the Marcos Jr. administration, it will primarily rely on itself, on the Philippines, to provide its national defense, but it will also depend on a lot of help and assistance from other countries that wanted the Philippines to be more secure, because that is a key to peace and stability in the region.
Yet, while the Philippines builds alliances, one group has remained relatively quiet. Its neighbors in ASEAN.
So David and Goliath narrative really captured so much support from the European countries, the G7 countries, and even other countries really supported the Philippines stand, unfortunately, except our neighboring countries.
Back in 2012, when the Philippines launched a case against China, we also got the same criticism that we should not have taken China to court. But other ASEAN states might not readily admit it, but they were quite happy with the verdict as well, because it somehow gives clarity that, for example, the 9-dash line or 10-dash line has no basis in international law.
Meanwhile, ASEAN is negotiating a new code of conduct for the South China Sea between its member states and China. It is an update to a 2-decade-old agreement meant to manage behaviors and disputes in the troubled waters. Current tensions add a layer of complexity to ongoing talks.
With China, they were really seeking consensus from all the members. Very difficult to see that happening given the current tensions that are there.
ASEAN's polarization and divides has negatively affected the code of conduct process. So at the moment, there is very little optimism and very little positive prospect that the code of conduct could deliver anything, because ASEAN is no longer seen the same when the code of conduct negotiations started up to this moment.
So, is conflict inevitable in the South China Sea? For now, both Beijing and Manila say they want dialogue. Meanwhile, each day brings more close calls and near misses between vessels in the South China Sea.
Well, hopefully we could find a quid pro quo, a situation that we both learn to respect each other's interests. And from there, of course, we could start a negotiation that, of course, will be fair to both sides?
I don't think you're going to see much change. I'm just hopeful that it doesn't escalate. It's all about, in the end, some sort of diplomatic solution. That means that all countries may not be happy, but they're not going to be in conflict. So that's generally how you solve things, but right now it seems that especially Washington wants to keep this on a low simmer, if not boil.
We cannot totally take out the possibility of possible conflict, possible accident that could, disturb the status quo in the South China Sea. So as much as it's important for everyone, for the Philippines to be sober, that should also be advised to both the United States and China. That the South China Sea is not simply a playground for them, that it's not simply a theater to settle their superpower rivalry.
If the shipping lanes get blocked or obstructed as a result of the conflicts in the South China Sea, then that's going to be bad for global trade and the global economy.
Whatever challenges the Philippine Navy or the Philippine government faces in the West Philippine Sea, we will not be deterred. We will continue performing our mandate, which is to secure the integrity of the national territory, to protect our sovereignty and look after the welfare of the Filipino.